Hello everyone, this is Kat and welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. This will be the continuation of Hidden Messages. This will be part 18, chapter 18, entitled The End of the Exercise. Tenya Ida has been poisoned. He is the 29th student removed. Izuku did his best to wipe the grin off his face. Luckily, he was standing a bit in front of everyone, so no one could see him grinning at the fact that one of his supposed allies was just poisoned. He took a deep breath and did his best to look surprised as he turned around. Todoroki was watching Ida with wide eyes as a drone had led him away. Even Tetsu looked confused. Shinso poisoned him. Todoroki whispered, his eyes still wide. Tetsu whipped around to look at Izuku, a question clearly in his eyes. Izuku just nodded slightly, acknowledging that he did know this was going to happen without alerting Todoroki. Tetsu's eyes widened even more. He may have known that Izuku was working with different people, but it was obvious that he didn't know that Izuku was willing to betray his own friends. Izuku didn't know what to say. He wanted to say something, but he was also worried about overreacting. If he wanted this to work, he needs to get to City Hall, preferably not alone. He technically could show up alone, but if the first person to arrive after him weren't Katsuki and the rest of his allies, he was screwed. He didn't know for sure who was left. Most of the announcements had happened during the fights that he wasn't able to actually listen in on well, but he doesn't think that he heard Yaoyorozu's name announced. If he had the element of surprise on his side, he could have a chance against her, but she had taken out Hananuki so effortlessly that he wasn't sure he could beat her, especially if she wasn't alone. Luckily, he didn't end up having to say anything. Tetsu spoke up instead. Okay, so are we going to actually just wait here, or are we going to head to City Hall? That was enough to get them moving again, toward Peach Court. They arrived not long after that, and Izuku grinned, ready to set his plan into action. He felt a little guilty about the property damage he was about to do, but the teachers never mentioned anything about it not being allowed, and he already destroyed one building anyway. Might as well make it two. Todoroki, get ready for a fight. I'm going to alert everyone to our position. Izuku started to float, dragging Tetsu with him. How? Todoroki asked before he could get very far. You'll see. Izuku grinned and took off. He was still using Black Whip to hold on to Tetsu, so he was dragged along with him. It had been over 15 minutes since he had captured him, so he would be considered out, but he could get free at any moment. Luckily, Todoroki hadn't noticed. He was too distracted by Ida being removed. Izuku shot straight to the roof of City Hall, first to grab the objects he had stashed there, and then to find a good spot on the dome. Before he started looking around the dome, he took a moment to carefully wrap the light bulb in one of the flags that he had in his bag. He tried to make everything fit as securely as possible, not wanting anything to break during the final fight. Once he was sure that the objects were secure, he started looking at the dome. He searched for a bit, inspecting every inch of the glass dome. Finally, after a few minutes, he seemed to find what he was looking for. Tetsu, I think you're far enough away, but just in case, now would be a great time to harden. What? Izuku didn't answer. Instead, he powered up One for All, upping the percentage in his legs to maximum, the amount he could actually handle. He took a deep breath, pulled his leg back, only to kick it forward a moment later. His foot found its mark, the small crack in the joints, the dome's weak spot. He probably could have kicked it anywhere with the same effort, but he wanted to make sure that this would work. With that one kick, the dome shattered. The force of his foot hitting the glass created a thunderous boom, followed by the sounds of shattering glass. A moment later, the statue that had been at the top of the dome hit the ground, causing another loud bang. There was no doubt about it. Everyone knew where they were. Izuku floated back to where Todoroki was standing, still dragging Tetsu. As soon as they got close, Todoroki yelled out to him, "Was that really necessary?" "The teachers never said that we couldn't cause property damage, and besides, everyone knows where we are now." Izuku shrugged and looked around. Todoroki was looking toward the entrance to the court, down 10th Street, but Izuku knew that there were many different directions that people could come from. His friends were insistent on following rules, not like breaking and entering and following roads instead of taking shortcuts, but he knew that not everyone would be like that. If it was up to him, their group wouldn't have been like that either, but Ida would have never allowed that to happen. It was probably good that he was poisoned before they got to this point. He would have had an aneurysm from Izuku causing that much property damage. They were waiting for a while before the first group appeared. They were coming from behind the City Hall, cutting through the grass and backyards, separating them from the nearest street. He had hoped that Katsuki and his group would show up first, but he wasn't that lucky. He only caught a glimpse of them before they had disappeared behind the building, but he was pretty sure that no one Katsuki was working with had long, dark hair. "Looks like we got our company. They're behind the City Hall. Be ready for when they come out." Izuku spoke to both Todoroki and Tetsu, loosening Tetsu's shackles even more. He was planning on releasing him once the fight got started, but until then he had to keep up the ruse. It turned out to be a good decision to keep Tetsu captured because Yaoyorozu came out from behind the building, guns blazing, flanked by Jiro, Kendo, and Kodai. Todoroki was able to create an ice shield to protect himself, while Izuku had yanked Tetsu in front of him, using him as a human shield. "What the hell, man?" Tetsu yelled out as his back was stained red. "What? You're metal, you're fine." Izuku pulled out his own weapon to begin firing back. "Well, yeah, but really? Using me as a human shield?" Tetsu tried to pull away, but Izuku just tightened the restraints. "You know, I could have taken you out earlier." Izuku spoke, but he wasn't paying much attention to the metal human shield that was in front of him. He was more focused on shooting at the girls that were attacking. As Izuku aimed at Kodai, he could feel Tetsu yanking at Black Whip, disturbing his focus. "Stop moving," he grunted at his metal shield. "I was just getting Kiri's attention," Tetsu explained. Izuku whipped his head around to find Katsuki, Kirishima, Shinso, and Kaminari all walking up. Everyone that was in the exercise was here now, so it was about to get interesting. Izuku was going to say something to Katsuki, but the explosive boy was already talking. "Why the fuck are you using Metal Man as a shield?" "I captured him earlier, and I needed a shield, so why not?" Izuku grinned as he shrugged. "What the fuck?" Tetsu was staring at Izuku like he was wild. To him, Izuku had just shrugged with a feral grin on his face for no reason. Katsuki shook his head, also smiling. "So what's the plan, nerd? Are we finally working together, or are we still going to fake fight?" "Let's not give up anything yet. But focus on taking out the girls first. Todoroki's going to go after everyone except for me." "Okay, let's kick some ass." Izuku was sure that Katsuki had turned to relay the message to the rest of the group as soon as he had finished talking because a second later the fight got a lot more interesting. The newcomers launched themselves at the girls, paintballs flying wildly while electricity had sparked and many different voices yelled out. Unfortunately, the first person to get hit was Shinso. A stray bullet shot by Kendo hit him in the shoulder, and then another in the chest. He was announced removed moments later. Izuku could tell that Kaminari was upset at that, but he couldn't focus on it. There was still a fight going on. With the girls distracted by more people joining the fight, they stopped firing on him, meaning that he didn't need his shield anymore. He nodded at Tetsu as he released him, and whispered quietly so Todoroki wouldn't hear. "Don't you dare take me out after all this." Tetsu nodded back and then ran to join the fight. Izuku took a moment to stretch and shake out his arms. He had trained a lot with Black Whip to be able to hold on to it for longer periods of time, but it still made his arms feel a little numb. He knew that feeling would come back quickly, but he didn't have time to wait. Luckily, he didn't use his arms much to fight after all the damage from the beginning of the year. After a moment, he rejoined the fight, just in time to see Tetsu take out Kodai with a paint grenade. She didn't even think to protect herself, convinced that Tetsu wouldn't turn on his classmates. Unfortunately for her, she was wrong. It was announced that she was removed moments later. Izuku let himself get pulled into the fight against Kendo. She was standing back and shooting, but her aim wasn't great. Izuku thought about keeping it a gunfight, but she had better cover. The girls had entered the court from a side that ensured an ample cover. Meanwhile, Izuku had been in the middle of the street. He was using Todoroki's ice walls that were littering the street, but they were melting. In addition to Bakugo and Todoroki's fire melting the ice, Yaoyorozu had created a flamethrower, especially trying to counteract the ice. With his cover disappearing quickly, Izuku made the decision to get close. Kendo had an extensive amount of combat training, so fighting up close might not be the best idea, but if he stays away like he is, it's likely that he'll be taken out with a bullet sooner rather than later, and that would really mess up his plans for how he wanted to end this. Izuku could tell that moving forward was starting to unsettle Kendo. He activated One for All, as well as Black Whip and Float, as he closed in on her, both for intimidation and mobility. She was panicking, but she was not backing down, still trying to shoot him. He aimed an Air Force blast at her, knocking the weapon out of her hands. Then it became a hand-to-hand fight. As they started exchanging blows, Izuku faintly recognized that Kaminari was announced as being removed from being shot, probably by Yaoyorozu, but he kept his focus on the fight. It was hard to dodge Kendo's enlarged hands, but with Float and the speed enhancement that One for All gave him, he was able to do it for the most part. He did take a few hits, but they didn't faze him too much. He could tell that Kendo was running out of steam. Her hits got slower, and there was less force behind them, but she was refusing to give up. A loud explosion to his right caught his attention, and he turned in time to see Katsuki take out Jiro. Having stunned her with an explosion before pulling out a gun to shoot her, Izuku did his best to hide a smile when he caught a glimpse of Katsuki's face. His eyes were wild from the thrill of the fight. The pride at having taken out Jiro was evident in his feral smile. Izuku loved seeing this side of Katsuki, his symbol of victory. Izuku's thoughts were cut off as he was batted away from the fight. Kendo had taken advantage of his distracted state and had hit him with as much force as she could muster. He took a second to get his bearings and then flew at her. He kicked and punched and attacked her with Black Whip, all in quick succession, forcing her back. He grabbed the knife that he had used to remove Uraraka, gripped it tight as he feinted with a kick. As she dodged, he moved quickly, reaching out and stabbing her with the knife. Her eyes widened in shock as she tried to bat him away with an enlarged hand, but it was too late. Izuka Kendo was stabbed. She's the 34th student to be removed. As soon as the announcement rang out, Izuku turned his attention away from her. She was no longer a threat. But there was still a fight going on. He turned just in time to see Kirishima and Tetsutetsu teaming up against Yaoyorozu. They were hiding behind an ice wall made by Todoroki, resting their quirks for a moment, but when they weren't paying attention, Todoroki snuck up on them. Izuku was about to yell out a warning, but he was too late. Todoroki shot one in the head, then the other, too quick for either to activate their quirks. There were only 4 students left, Todoroki, Yaoyorozu, Katsuki, and Izuku, and almost immediately after the last announcement rang out and the air filled with smoke, making it so that it was impossible to see. There was no way of knowing which person had used a smoke bomb. 3 out of the 4 people that were left all had the ability to make smoke. Izuku was on edge, not nearly as much as he knew the others were. Both Katsuki and Todoroki had listed him as their top ally, so neither would hurt him without risking their own grade, so the only one that he had to fear was Yaoyorozu. There was a sound to his right, so he activated his quirk. The smoke around him was reflecting the green glow that he was letting off. He noticed a shift in the smoke, right above his head level, so he trusted his instincts and ducked, narrowly avoiding a bullet. He heard sounds of fighting nearby, the popping of more bullets being fired, but the smoke near him remained unchanged. Not enjoying the lack of his sight, Izuku took on a ready stance, and then he upped the percentage of 1 for all on his finger. He flicked, similarly to how he did in the sports festival, except now that he was able to keep from breaking his finger. All at once the smoke disappeared, displaced by the force of his blast. Izuku looked around carefully, just in time to see Katsuki land a shot on Yaoyorozu, the bullet hitting her in the chest. As the announcement rang out, announcing her as the 37th student removed, Todoroki had pointed his gun at Katsuki's head. Again Katsuki was staring down the barrel of a gun, once again pointed by one of Izuku's friends. "I could take you out right now." Todoroki's voice was low and cold. "But Midoriya is asked to be the one to do that." Todoroki's eyes flicked over to Izuku, who was pulling out his own gun. With Todoroki's eyes on him, Izuku slowly leveled the gun at Katsuki, took a deep breath. Katsuki's eyes widened slightly, even when trying to do his best to look confident. "I'm sorry," Izuku started, still staring at Katsuki. "But I can't remove my top ally." Before anyone could react, Izuku changed where he was pointing his gun and pulled the trigger. The red paint dripped down Todoroki's face between his wide eyes. "Shoto Todoroki has been shot in the head. He's the 38th student removed." Todoroki stumbled back, letting confusion show on his face. "This exercise is now over. Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakako are each other's top allies, and they're the only 2 that remain." Izuku turned away from Todoroki to look at Katsuki, to find him already looking at him with a large smile. They made eye contact, and then he was moving. Within moments he had tackled Katsuki, knocking him over. Izuku was laying on top of him, not unlike how they'd been under the rubble. Izuku only took a moment to look at the explosive boy before he leaned in and pressed his lips to Katsuki's. For a moment neither of them moved, and Izuku thought that he had read the look on Katsuki's face wrong. He started to pull away, but before he could, Katsuki grabbed the front of his hero costume, pulling him in close. Slowly, Izuku felt Katsuki's lips moving against his own, and Izuku almost cried in relief. It wasn't a great kiss by anyone's definition. It was obvious that neither of them had any idea what they were doing. But to them, their first kiss was perfect. The teacher sat back and watched as the exercise went on. After the problem duos fight, their attention was drawn to the group consisting of Kororo, Tokiyami, Shoji, Koda, and Komori. In the distance, Tokiyami noticed Yaoyorozu, Jiro, Hagekure, Ojiro, Kendo, and Kodai. He could have ignored them, but instead he used them as a scapegoat to do his task. He used Dark Shadow as a distraction and then shot Komori, effectively betraying his ally. Aizawa took note of how impressive it was that Tokiyami was able to so convincingly make it look like he'd been someone from Yaoyorozu's team that took her out. The 2 teams' fight was short, and during it another group had a run-in. Rin, Tsutonori, and Sato happened upon Iwase, Kaibara, Bondo, Fukidashi, and Shishida. Sato shot Kaibara, removing him, and then they disappeared. By the time both fights had ended, there were 31 students left. It was getting a bit concerning with how many students were still in the exercise, and how few had their objects. A large reason for many students not having their objects was Midoriya's collection in his makeshift bag, but there were still quite a few objects hidden in the training grounds. Aizawa's attention was again brought to Midoriya as his group came upon Tokiyami, Shoji, and Koda. To his surprise, and to the surprise of many other people in the room with him, not only did Midoriya and his group not fight them, but Midoriya gave them an object from his bag. He didn't look too happy about it, but the gift seemed to make the 2 groups trust each other more. Knowing that he couldn't watch the one student the entire time, Aizawa let his eyes drift across the rest of the screens. A section of Class B screens had caught his eye, and he leaned forward in interest, waiting at the edge of his seat for what would happen next. A group of Class B students was almost to Midoriya's group, and there were many other groups nearby that seemed to be heading toward them. It looked as though there was about to be a large fight. Sure enough, a battle began, and group after group arrived. From what Aizawa could see, there was a hesitant, unspoken alliance made within each of the two classes, with most students choosing to attack the other class rather than their own classmates. Yes, it's getting interesting again. President Mike was getting excited by the chaotic fight. Aizawa couldn't blame him. This was easily the most interesting fight that's happened since the problem duo had ran into each other. Many teachers jumped when Nezu announced the first people removed from the fight. Where did that grenade even come from? Snipe asked, while many of the other teachers voiced their own confusion. Aizawa couldn't tell either, even though he usually was very good at noticing things like that. Instead of answering, Nezu used a screen that was originally for one of the students that had been removed to rewind different cameras, looking for any indication of who had thrown the grenade. Aizawa didn't bother to hide his grin as Nezu was finally successful. No one should have been surprised at this point, but there was still a few gasps when it was shown that Midoriya had been the one to throw that grenade. Their attention was brought back to the present fight as bullets were flying everywhere, removing even more students. Even as other students were removed, Aizawa's eyes were drawn to Midoriya, and he knew that he wasn't the only one. It took a moment, but Aizawa finally figured out why. Every so often, Midoriya would watch one of his own allies' fights and see an attack coming for them. His body language would become similar to what it was when he was speaking with Bakugo, and then his ally would avoid the attack. It was subtle. In fact, Aizawa only noticed it because he'd been watching the boys so closely since that first assignment. It was possible that it was nothing. After all, both boys had acknowledged their language. It took years to develop, meaning that no one would be able to learn it that fast. But it was still interesting. A choking sound from Vlad King had brought Aizawa's attention to the rest of the battle. He had missed the actual shot being fired, but Aizawa was proud of his student when he realized what had happened. Hananuki had paint dripping down their face as Yaoyorozu had run off with her group, carrying a paintball gun that was not one of the types that were laid out for them. He would bet that she'd created the paintball gun and shot it in almost one motion. That was the only thing that would explain his coworker's shock. The fight died down quickly after that, as many students were removed. Aizawa was wondering how Midoriya would end the fight, as the only student that was left that he was not allied with or pretending to be allied with was Rin. The Class B boy was not a bad fighter, but he was not able to hold up against Midoriya's strength, as was apparent when he was flying into the air, taking down a building. A drone went in after him quickly, making sure that he was all right, and then the building fell. The teachers all watched in shock as almost all the students got out from under the building, but not all of them. Aizawa struggled to keep his face neutral as Bakugo had tackled Midoriya, barely avoiding a piece of rubble that would have crushed him. Nezu flipped through cameras frantically as many teachers, Aizawa included, got ready to head down to dig out the problem duo. Wait! Nezu stopped them at the door. My students are being crushed under rubble. They could be bleeding out. Aizawa tried to argue, pushing his way past the other teachers to the door. They are fine. Nezu's shrill voice had rang out, catching Aizawa's attention. He whipped his head around to look at the center screen. When he saw the image on it, he let out a sigh of relief. Bakugo and Midoriya were in a small cavity in the rubble. They didn't have a lot of space, but neither looked injured. A wall had collapsed next to them, creating a small triangle of safety. We still need to get them out, Aizawa argued, even though no one else moved. It looks like Ida and Todoroki have already started to remove the rubble. Let's give them a few minutes to see what they do, and then you can intervene. Nezu pointed at another screen, showing the two students in question, working together to carefully remove the rubble. Their strategy wasn't ideal. Ida was kicking apart pieces after Todoroki stabilized the surrounding area, but it wasn't terrible, especially with no other help. It hurt for Aizawa to watch one of his students obviously panic at being in such a small space, but he just had to watch and hope that Midoriya was able to calm his friend. He let out a breath that he was barely aware he was even holding, as he saw that Midoriya was successful and they were both calm again. Once he realized that the problem duo was fine, he turned his attention to the rescue efforts. Ida and Todoroki were making quick work of the rubble, and after a bit of digging, they found the two trapped students and got them out, only for Bakugo to use his quirk to leave as soon as he could. It didn't take long for Bakugo to find his allies, and then the exercise got boring again. Each group remained separate from the other, still searching for objects. Many were already found, so there was little success. Midoriya's group took center screen when he found an object, and then another group found them. Aizawa didn't even try to hide his proud smile as he saw Midoriya sneak around the Class B students, and it was not surprising that they didn't even notice him. Midoriya had learned a lot since Aizawa started helping him with training, and as long as he didn't start glowing, he had gotten very good at not being seen. The other teachers apparently hadn't noticed him sneaking around either, because when he slashed Subaraba's throat, many gasps had rang out. "Where did he come from?" Present Mike struggled to keep his quirk from seeping into his voice. Nezu cackled before he announced the removal, and then continued to cackle at the panic on the screen. Aizawa was again proud at his students, as they took advantage of the other students' panic to attack. All 3 Class A students shot different Class B students, removing 2 of them. Tetsu was the only one that remained, and it was only because he had turned to steel before the bullet hit. Everyone was on the edge of their seats as Midoriya ran to attack, only for him to stop completely. The cameras were too far away to hear what they were saying, so questions rang out as to why he decided to talk instead of fight. But Aizawa had an idea. Kirishima is one of the students that Midoriya was working with, and it was no secret that he's close friends with Tetsu. In fact, according to the papers that they turned in, they're each other's top allies. If he was going to bet on it, he would bet that Tetsu had just let him know that he was in on it, making him a more valuable ally than the 2 people that he was supposedly working with. When Midoriya used Black Whip to capture Tetsu, Nezu went to start the clock, but Aizawa stopped him. "Look, he's not actually captured. He could escape if he wanted to." Aizawa motioned to where Black Whip only appeared to be tight. A closer look proved that the black strands were only loosely wrapped around Tetsu. "Oh, how interesting," Nezu chirped with a grin. Aizawa was worried about how much Nezu was learning about his student from this exercise, but there was nothing he could do about it. They all watched in interest as Midoriya planned with Todoroki Nitta, many teachers realizing that this had been his plan from the beginning. He was leading them back to City Hall, where he hid his object, and where he plans to end the exercise. At the beginning of the exercise, if anyone had told Aizawa that Midoriya had a plan to end the exercise, he would hesitate to think that it would work, but after watching everything that he had done, Aizawa knew better than to doubt him. Normally a hero would go in with a plan, only to end up winging it in the end, but that hasn't happened yet. Midoriya had been following the same plan the whole time, and it was working for him. Nezu cackled as the timer he had next to him went off, alerting them that the poison Shinso had used finally worked. For the first time throughout the exercise, Midoriya's acting failed. He was grinning as he heard the announcement, in a way that could not be explained away if he was to be questioned by it. Aizawa found himself tense, waiting to see if this was where the ruse was finally up, but somehow he changed his expression to one of surprise, even as he nodded to Tetsu. It was hard to see why he was nodding, but Tetsu must have understood. Aizawa could see Midoriya overthinking, but it was Tetsu who surprisingly would save him in this, and brought their attention back to Midoriya's plan. As they traveled, Aizawa took that opportunity to look at the other screens. The rest of the students all seemed to be looking for each other. They must have figured out at this point that they weren't going to find any more objects, so instead they wandered the grounds looking for people to fight. The teachers had discussed the scenario beforehand, deciding that if the exercise came to this, they would try and lead them to the same place, or end the exercise early if that wasn't possible. However, not one teacher had suggested that they follow this predetermined plan. Everyone was much too interested in seeing what Midoriya planned instead. When Midoriya flew up to the roof of the city hall, the teachers all expected him to just grab the objects he stashed there. No one was expecting him to examine the glass dome and then demolish it. There wasn't a sound in the viewing room as they watched as the dome shattered and the statue fell. The screens were filled with students turning toward the sound, but the teachers didn't take their eyes off of the shattered dome. "Is that allowed?" All Might asked after being silent for the majority of the exercise. Aizawa could only imagine what was going through his head, watching his successor dominate this exercise in a way that no one would have expected. Before anyone answered him, Midoriya answered a similar question that Todoroki had asked. "The teachers never said that we couldn't cause property damage, and besides, everyone knows where we are now." "He's right," Nezu cackled. "We never said they couldn't destroy things." Nezu looked way too happy with this development, but Aizawa did his best to push that out of his mind. Midoriya's plan worked, and the other group started to head toward him. Unfortunately, the closest group to him was Yaoyorozu, Jiro, Kendo, and Kodai, not Bakugo and the rest of his allies. Aizawa worried for a moment that Midoriya wouldn't notice them arrive. He knew that he wasn't supposed to be rooting for any student in particular, but every teacher in that room was now rooting for Midoriya to succeed. He'd proven to be more impressive than they'd expected up until this point, and they hoped that it would continue. Aizawa was relieved when Midoriya noticed the students that had arrived, although he and many of his coworkers had to hold back a laugh when he used Tetsu as a shield. The steel student didn't seem too happy with the arrangement, but it wasn't the worst strategy on Midoriya's part, and it seemed to be working well. Tetsu started to wave his arms wildly, or rather, as wildly as he could while still restrained by Black Whip. Midoriya looked frustrated for a moment, then confused, but the teachers all knew the reason. Kirishima had shown up, along with Bakugo, Shinso, and Kaminari. A feral grin took on Midoriya's face, one that no one had ever seen before, yet seemed so fitting for him in the exercise. This was the finale he planned. Cheers spread out through the room. As the fight started, the teachers had been waiting for this all day. Aizawa was disappointed, as the first person to be taken out during this fight was Shinso, but his son had done well. He was sure to score high after everything, that he was bound to get some espionage points and hero points for as well. With the new people joining the fight, Midoriya finally set Tetsu free. Aizawa felt a twinge of worry when Midoriya started stretching and shaking out his arms. He was getting better with his quirks, but numb arms were a terrible thing to have in a battle. Luckily, it didn't seem to be too big of a deal, because he rushed into the fight not long after, just in time to see Tetsu take out Kodai, cementing his alliance with Class A. Midoriya started fighting Kendo, leaving Bakugo to take on Jiro and Tetsu and Kirishima to take on Yaoyorozu. Todoroki was fighting Kaminari, at least until Yaoyorozu took him out, leaving Todoroki free to attack anyone. Bakugo was fighting well against Jiro, having figured out in the last battle that the most efficient way to remove someone was to stun them with his quirk and then shoot them. He used that strategy to take out Jiro. Many teachers were muttering comments, commending his strategy. For the most part, though, teachers were silent, sitting on the edge of their seats, invested in the ongoing fight. "That's my boy," All Might whispered, not meaning to say anything at all, while Midoriya fought back Kendo. And it had been a worry at the back of Aizawa's mind during the whole exercise that All Might would not approve of Midoriya's actions. He was acting more like an underground or an undercover hero, not like the limelight hero that All Might had been training him to be. It didn't help that All Might had remained silent for the majority of the time, hearing All Might whisper his pride at his successor's hard pushback against Kendo, culminating in stabbing her. That worry seeped away. There was only one Class B student left in the final 6, but he was taken out moments later, followed immediately by Kirishima. The 4 final students all were from Class A, filling Aizawa with pride. He knew he told his students that was not a competition between classes, but he's always been competitive, especially against Vlad. "Yes, go girl!" Aizawa was shocked at Midnight's yell, but he understood why she'd yelled after only a moment. She'd been working with Yaoyorozu on making gas come out of her skin using her quirk. From what he understood so far, she had only figured out a harmless smoke, not unlike what smoke machines made, but she was using it now to obscure the view of her opponents. She also made herself some thermal vision glasses to have an idea of her classmates' locations, even when they couldn't see. Their vision on the screens was also obscured, but after a moment of some of the screens switching to thermal vision, it was hard to tell exactly what was happening, but from the thermal vision and the way the smoke was moving, it looked as though Yaoyorozu was just shooting at whichever of her classmates she saw. She shot at one of the students, only for him to start glowing a toxic green a second later. The green glow was painful to look at on the screen. The teachers were all able to look away for different angles and screens quickly, but from Yaoyorozu's reaction, the glow had blinded her momentarily. She kept shooting even though she couldn't see, but Bakugo was able to get in close. They all got to watch Bakugo take her out as Midoriya cleared the smoke with a flick. Aizawa grinned as he realized with Yaoyorozu out, Midoriya was sure to finish out the exercise without being removed. Both the people had listed him as their top ally. Todoroki didn't know that, though, and held a gun to Bakugo's head, even as he was offering the final kill to Midoriya. The tension in the room grew as Midoriya pointed his gun at Bakugo. Aizawa was barely breathing as he waited for him to make his final move. "I'm sorry." Gasps rang out around the room as it looked like Midoriya apologized to Bakugo. "But I can't remove my top ally." The final gunshot wasn't heard in the viewing room. The teachers were far too loud for that. All Might was cheering, not even being subtle about his favoritism for Midoriya, but then again, neither was anyone else. Aizawa had never seen so many teachers favor one student before, but even Vlad King seemed excited about what had occurred. Nezu made the announcement, ending the exercise, and Aizawa watched Midoriya tackle Bakugo. Aizawa worried for a moment that he was going to attack him for some reason, but when he saw them kiss, he pointedly turned away. His students had done well. Nezu could deal with that. All right, everyone. This concludes Chapter 18 of Hidden Messages. Chapter 19 will be next. Hope you guys are enjoying this one, and as always, thank you so much for listening.